6 p.m. hits, the laptop closes, the house is quiet, and you are just absolutely physically shattered. Your brain feels like wet cement, and you look back your day and realize you didn't actually finish anything. You moved the email an inch. You survived the Zoom call. You replied to the text. But the big project,
Hey everyone, welcome to Resilient Inspirations. We're here to share ideas, swap stories, and just see where the conversation takes us. Nothing fancy, just real talk with a spark of inspiration. Let's dive in. I'll hand it over to the crew.
I want to start today by describing a feeling I think every single person listening is going to recognize. It's, say, 10:00 a.m., you're at your desk, you've got an email draft open that you've been trying to wrestle with for 45 minutes.
Yep, I know this feeling.
But you've also got that Slack window blinking in the corner, and the red dot feels like it's burning a hole in your screen. You have a Zoom call starting in 6 minutes, so you're kind of mentally prepping for that. And of course, your phone is vibrating. It's your partner asking what time you'll be home.
Right, the modern orchestra of chaos.
Exactly. And in that one moment, you feel kind of powerful. Like a conductor waving the baton, keeping all these different plates spinning in the air.
The master multitasker. It's become this modern badge of honor, hasn't it?
It really has. It's this invisible badge we all wear. We even brag about it. Oh, I'm great at multitasking. I could juggle 3 projects at once. But then there's the other side of that coin, the part we don't brag about.
Yes. 6:00 p.m.
6 p.m. hits, the laptop closes, the house is quiet. And you are just absolutely physically shattered. Your brain feels like wet cement. And you look back your day and realize you didn't actually finish anything. You moved the email an inch. You survived the Zoom call. You replied to the text. But the big project, the deep, meaningful work, it's exactly where you left it yesterday. You have exhaustion without progress.
And that right there, exhaustion without progress, that's the defining problem for the modern knowledge worker. And frankly, it's a tragedy. We have completely confused motion with action.
And that's exactly what this book is about.
It is. The book we're diving into today, Beyond Multitasking, the real skill that makes you unstoppable by Resilient Inspirations, basically argues that this badge of honor we're so proud of, it's actually a suicide pact for your productivity.
It's a pretty intense read. And I'll be honest, when I first picked it up, my guard went right up. I thought, okay, here we go. Another productivity guru telling me to wake up at 4 a.m., drink some kale juice, and stare at a blank wall for 4 hours.
It is standard advice, yeah.
Right. Because let's be real. I have a boss. I have deadlines. If I don't answer that Slack message, I'm the bottleneck. I can't just check out of reality.
Yeah.
So my question is this book actually practical for people with, real jobs?
And that is exactly why I wanted to cover this one. Because it addresses that skepticism head on. The goal isn't to say you can never do 2 things at once. I mean, that's just unrealistic.
Totally.
The mission here is a total deconstruction of how we work, but based on biology. We're going to analyze why the brain fails at multitasking, not metaphorically, but like on a biological level. But then, and this is the key, we're going to look at when it might actually be okay.
The whole strategic multitasking idea.
Exactly. And finally, we're going to try to build a system, a real tactical framework that helps you survive in a world that is fundamentally designed for distraction, all without losing your mind.
All right, let's get into the machinery of it then. Part 1, the biology of the illusion. The book kicks off by basically saying the word we use, multitasking, is a lie.
It's a complete linguistic trick. When we say multitasking, we imagine parallel processing. We think we're like a computer with a quad-core processor, running Excel in the background while running Word in the foreground. And both are happening at 100% efficiency.
Yeah, that's a dream.
But Chapter 1 makes this definitive claim. The human brain, specifically our conscious attention, is single-threaded.
Okay, so when I think I'm doing 2 things at once, like listening to this deep dive and writing an email, what's actually happening inside my skull?
You are engaging in what's called rapid switching. The book uses this great analogy.
Yeah.
Think of your attention not as a floodlight that illuminates a whole room.
Right, which is what it feels like.
It's what we want it to be, but it's actually a spotlight, a very narrow, very intense beam, and it can only light up one small circle at a time. So when you try to multitask, you're not widening the beam, you are just jerking the spotlight back and forth between the podcast and the email at an incredible speed.
And that jerking motion, that flickering, it feels like we're doing both at the same time.
It creates a seamless illusion, just like a movie reel is just a series of still images. But biologically, it is a complete disaster. The book really digs into the neuroscience here, focusing on the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, that's the executive function part of the brain, right? Decision-making and all that.
Exactly. And every single time you move that spotlight, your brain has to perform something called a context switch.
Okay, let's drill down on context switch, because I think most of us just think, oh, I just looked away for a second, it's no big deal. Why is it a big deal biologically?
Okay, imagine your working memory is a stage in a theater. When you're writing that email, the stage is set. You've got the actors, those are the concepts you're writing about. You've got the props, the tone, the vocabulary, the person you're writing to. The whole lighting rig is set for email mode.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now your phone buzzes, you look at a text.
Okay, I look at the text.
Biologically, a stage crew, which is your metabolic energy, has to literally rush out on stage, strike the set, drag all those email props off into the wings, and then quickly drag out the text message props. Who is this from? Is it urgent? What's the context here? You answer the text, then you look back at the email.
And the crew has to do it all over again in reverse.
They have to rush back out, stripe the text message set, and rebuild the entire email set from scratch.
And this takes energy,
Right.
real physical energy.
It takes glucose. It is a metabolic tax. The book calls this the switching cost. And it's not just the time loss, it's literal brain fuel you're burning. And here's the really scary part. The book calls it the residue effect.
Residue.
Yeah, the research shows that when you switch contexts, the set doesn't get built back perfectly right away. There's a cognitive residue from the previous task that lingers. You might be staring at your email, but 20% of your brain is still backstage thinking about that text message.
That explains so much. That's why after a day of heavy multitasking, I feel like I can't even form a coherent sentence. It's not just that I'm tired, it's that I burned all my fuel on stage management instead of the actual play.
Precisely. You have spent all your energy moving furniture around and almost none of it actually acting. And to make it all worse, there's a chemical trap that keeps us doing it. The dopamine loop.
Right, because if it's so draining, why do we do it? Why does it feel so good in the moment?
Because the brain rewards novelty. It's a survival mechanism. Every time you answer a ping or check a notification or cross some tiny, meaningless task off a list, you get a little hit of dopamine. It feels like doing, it feels productive. The book calls this the illusion of efficiency. You feel like you're standing on an invisible plateau. You feel the wind in your hair. You feel like you're moving fast, but you're just running in circles.
That's like eating candy for dinner. You get that immediate sugar rush. You feel full for a minute, but 2 hours later, you crash because there was absolutely no nutrition.
That is a perfect analogy. And this leads us to the model of the mind that's presented in Chapter 4, which for me was one of the most humbling parts of the book. It describes the mind not as some supercomputer, but as an antiquated workshop.
I loved this visual. Walk us through the workshop.
Okay, so picture an old craftsman's workshop. It has these incredible high-quality tools, saws, chisels, drills. That's your cognitive ability, your logic, your creativity. These tools are amazing, but the workshop itself, it's tiny. And the workbench, that's your working memory, is very, very small. You can probably fit 1, maybe 2 projects on it at a time, max.
And what do? We try to pile everything on there at once.
Exactly. We throw the email, the phone call, the project strategy, and what we want for lunch all onto this tiny workbench. And what happens?
Yes.
The tools collide. You knock things over. The book compares ideas in our working memory to fragile crystal vases. If you're holding just one, you can polish it, admire it, you can really understand it. But if you try to hold 5 at once,
You're not polishing anything. You're just desperately trying not to drop them.
you enter survival mode. You aren't thinking. You're just coping. You can't do deep creative work on a vase if your entire focus is on not letting it shatter on the floor. And eventually, you do drop one. That's when you forget the attachment on an important email, or you miss a key detail in a meeting.
And there was another analogy in that chapter that really hit home for me, the one about the dull blade.
Yes, this gets at the fatigue factor. When you work in this high-switching, low-depth mode for hours on end, your cognitive blade, your focus, it just gets dull. And attempting to do complex, high-stakes work with a fatigued brain is like trying to carve a beautiful sculpture with a butter knife.
You can try.
You can try, But it's going to be messy, it's going to take you 3 times as long, and you are highly, highly likely to slip and cut yourself.
And cutting yourself in the knowledge economy means making a bad decision that costs the company money or sending a terse reply that ruins a client relationship.
That's it. The biological verdict is just crystal clear. Multitasking degrades the quality of your thought. It literally lowers your functional IQ in the moment. It burns through energy incredibly efficiently, but produces results incredibly inefficiently.
Okay, so the biology is pretty damning. Our brains are basically spotlights with very small batteries.
Yeah.
But now we have to deal with the real world. So let's move to part 2, the cultural trap. Because biology is one thing, but if I go into my office tomorrow and say, sorry, everyone, my spotlight is busy, people are not going to applaud me for it.
No, they will not. And that's because we've built a work culture that actively worships the opposite of how our biology is designed to function. Chapter 3 calls this the modern pressure. We have fundamentally confused urgency with importance.
This is a distinction I struggle with all the time. Because when my phone buzzes, it feels urgent. It activates that little fight or flight response in my gut.
And that's by design. The technology is built to hack your internal alarm system. But the book asks us to just step back and analyze. Urgency is time-based. Does this need to happen right now? Importance is value-based. Does this actually matter in the long run?
Right.
A Slack message that just says, got a sec, is urgent. It is almost never important, but because it's loud and immediate, it jumps to the front of the queue.
But let's play devil's advocate here for a minute. The book talks about this guilt of slowing down. In my office, if I don't answer that got a sec message within a few minutes, I feel like I'm failing my team. I feel like I look lazy. How does the author reconcile this idea of deep work with the reality that other people are constantly waiting on us?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the author acknowledges that you can't just become a hermit, but they make a really interesting point that this guilt is often internal. We've come to associate inactivity, or what looks like inactivity, like deep, quiet thinking, with incompetence. We think that if we're not visibly typing, we're not working.
That's so true.
The book calls this the rise of fragmented thinking. Over time, we have literally trained our brains to scan for keywords rather than to comprehend full arguments.
The scanning versus comprehending shift. I feel this so deeply. I used to be able to sit and read a book for 2 hours straight. Now, after 10 minutes, my hand just automatically reaches for my phone. It's like a phantom limb.
That's because you've trained your brain to expect a new context, a new stimulus every 3 minutes. You're addicted to the new. And the consequence of this is that we're losing the ability to build what the book calls mental cathedrals.
Mental cathedrals, I like that.
If you're constantly being interrupted while you're building, you're only ever laying down a few bricks at a time, you never get to put the roof on, your mind becomes this landscape of half-finished thoughts and foundations with no structure.
So what's the alternative? The book gets almost poetic in Chapter 2, talking about the lost strength of single focus. It uses this idea of the craftsman model.
And this is the antidote to the chaos. Look at a sculptor or a scientist from the past. A stone carver would study a single move for hours before they even picked up the mallet to strike. That is traditional mastery. The book argues that this kind of single focus isn't just about efficiency, it's about perception.
They brought up yoga, which I thought was an odd left turn at first, but then it made so much sense.
It makes perfect sense in this context. When you hold a really difficult yoga pose, or when you focus intensely on a single line of code, your sensory perception of that one thing deepens. You start to see nuances and details you would completely miss if you were just scanning over it. Your accuracy goes up. Your memory retention goes up.
There's a line that I actually highlighted. Focus is not a limitation of freedom. It is a manifestation of discipline that protects your resources.
That is such a crucial reframe. We often think, I want to be free to check my email or scroll Twitter whenever I want. But that's not freedom, that's just impulsivity. Real freedom is having the discipline to say, I value my mental energy too much to let it leak out on things that don't actually matter. Focus is a shield, not a cage.
Okay, so we've established our brains are bad at multitasking and that our culture pushes us into these bad habits anyway.
Yeah.
But we promised the skeptics, and I'm still one of them, that we wouldn't just leave it at go live in a cave. So we have to talk about part 3, strategic multitasking.
This is where the book gets incredibly practical and I think really useful. It admits that, yes, you can do 2 things at once, provided you follow the laws of your own biology. And the key is understanding something called cognitive load.
Right. So the book splits tasks into high load and low load. Let's define those, because I think it's easy for people to miscategorize their own work.
For sure. Think of high-load tasks as the gas guzzlers for your brain. These are tasks that require your executive function, your prefrontal cortex. We're talking about writing, analyzing data, learning a new skill, or having an emotionally complex conversation. These tasks burn high-octane fuel.
Okay. And low load.
Low-load tasks run on the autopilot parts of your brain, like the basal ganglia. These are things that are habitual, repetitive actions. Folding laundry, walking a route you take every day, washing dishes, maybe even simple data entry if you've done it 1,000 times.
So the safe zone for multitasking is pairing a low-load task with, another low-load task?
With a high-load task, actually. This works because they're drawing fuel from two different tanks in the brain. You can go for a walk, which is low-load motor function, and think through a complex problem, which is high-load executive function. In fact, the rhythm of the walking can sometimes actually stimulate the thinking.
That's why walking meetings are so effective for some people.
Exactly. But the disaster happens when we try to pair two high-load tasks.
That's the danger zone.
It's a complete catastrophe. You cannot write a complex pitch deck, high load, and listen to a podcast about economics, high load, at the same time. Both of those activities require language processing. Both require executive logic. It's like trying to run two high-performance video games on a really old laptop. The whole system just crashes.
So the book gives us some rules of pairing. It has a never list.
It does. And rule number 1 is never pair two tasks that demand judgment. If you have to make a decision in both tasks, do not do them together. And rule number 2 is never pair an emotional task with a strategic one.
Oh, this one hit me hard. I'm so guilty of trying to answer work emails while having a serious talk with my partner over text message.
And how does that usually go for you?
It's terrible. I end up sounding like a robot in the email, and I sound completely dismissive in the text. I fail at both.
Because the emotional load bleeds over. Emotional processing takes up a huge amount of your working memory. If you're processing anger or worry from that text conversation, that emotion is now sitting on your mental workbench right next to your spreadsheet. It colors your judgment. You might make a more aggressive or risky financial decision just because you're annoyed at your text messages.
That is fascinating. The emotion isn't compartmentalized at all. It just spills everywhere.
Everywhere. So the OK list is all about combining opposites. Mechanical plus mental, driving plus audiobooks, but they make a key distinction, only on a clear highway.
Right, because the city traffic is different. Traffic requires judgment.
Suddenly, driving in traffic turns from a low-load to a high-load task. You have to predict what the other driver is going to do. That's executive function. And if you're listening to a complex audiobook in heavy traffic, you'll notice you keep having to rewind it. That's your brain prioritizing not dying over learning about ancient history.
Good priority to have.
A very good one.
There's one more partner in multitasking the book mentions, and it's the only one that doesn't actually cost us any energy. Automation.
Yes. The book frames automation, things like AI, email filters, scheduling rules, as the well-maintained tools back in your workshop. If you set up a filter that automatically sorts your emails into different folders, that is a task happening simultaneously with your work. But because a machine is doing it, it costs you 0 glucose. That is the only truly free multitasking.
So before we move on to tactics, what are the warning signs? How do I know if I've crossed the line from strategic multitasking into toxic multitasking?
The book lists 3 clear red flags. First, rising irritability. If someone asks you a simple question and you feel a flash of rage, your cognitive load is way too high.
Okay.
Second, mental static. That's that buzzing, anxious feeling where you just can't seem to settle your mind on anything. And third, the classic one, the reread. If you read a sentence, get to the end, and realize you have absolutely no idea what it said, stop. You're fried. You need a reset.
Okay, that's a perfect lead-in. Let's get tactical. Part 4. Tactics. We know the theory now. How do we actually build this framework into, say, a Tuesday morning? The book starts with knowing your patterns.
This is all about energy management over time management. We all have a chronotype. Some of us are morning larks. Some of us are night owls.
I am definitely not a morning lark. If I try to do high-load creative work at 7 a.m., I'm just staring at a blinking cursor.
And the book says, stop fighting that. It's like swimming against the current. Instead, cache the tailwind. Identify your peak biological hours. It's usually a 2 to 4 hour window. And protect that time with your life. That is when you do your high-load work.
And the low-load admin stuff.
Do that during your slump hours. The emails, the forms, the repetitive stuff.
But it's not just about the time of day. It's about triggers. And this was really insightful for me. It said, we often multitask not because we're being distracted, but because we're avoiding something.
Yes. Internal triggers. So often we switch tabs to check our email, not because we need to check our email, but because the report we're writing is hard. It's making us feel stupid or vulnerable. So we switch over to email, a task we know we can do, to get a quick, easy hit of competence. It's an emotional crutch.
So the key is to ask yourself in that moment, am I checking this because it's urgent or because I'm feeling bored or scared or anxious?
Precisely. And when you catch that trigger, you need to deploy a mental reset. The book suggests physical interventions, a 1-minute pause.
Okay, walk me through that. Is it just like sitting there and meditating?
It's more active than that. It involves a posture change. Stand up, stretch your arms over your head, take one deep, slow breath. Biologically, this does 2 things. It resets your proprioception, your body's sense of where it is in space, and the deep breath signals to your parasympathetic nervous system to calm down. It breaks that dopamine loop of the distraction and allows you to consciously re-enter the spotlight.
Let's talk about the physical workspace. Chapter 7 talks about visual tools, and it specifically recommends moving away from digital apps and using physical things, like a Kanban board.
Oh, I love this advice. A Kanban board is so simple. It's just 3 columns on a whiteboard or a wall. To do, doing, and done. And you use sticky notes for your tasks.
But why is the physical nature of it so important? Why not just use a digital tool like Trello?
Because of something called cognitive offloading. If your to-do list is just another open tab on your screen, it's still competing for attention with your actual work. It's another pixelated thread. But if it's a physical board on the wall across the room, it occupies a completely different sensory space.
That's a great point.
And also the act of physically picking up a sticky note and moving it from doing to done is incredibly satisfying. It provides this visceral sense of progress that just clicking a digital checkbox completely lacks.
It also prevents you from lying to yourself. You literally can't fit 20 sticky notes in the doing column.
Exactly. It forces you to acknowledge the physical limitations of your workbench. If the doing column is full, you cannot add another task until you finish one. It makes all those invisible constraints visible.
The book also talks a lot about systematizing consistency through routines.
Yeah.
And I know the word routine sounds boring. It sounds like the opposite of being unstoppable.
But if you look at it through the lens of your amygdala, the threat detection center of your brain, it makes perfect sense. The amygdala hates uncertainty. The question, what should I do next, is actually a stressful question for the brain. It requires energy to answer. A routine creates safety.
How so?
Well, if you have a routine where you always check your email at 9:00 a.m., 1:00 p.m., and 4:00 p.m., your brain doesn't have to spend the whole day constantly asking, should I check my email now? What about now? The decision is already made.
So you're reducing decision fatigue.
Significantly, you're saving all your best decision-making fuel for the work itself, not for managing the schedule of the work.
This transitions perfectly into part 5, which is all about self-mastery. Because you can have the sticky notes in the routine, but if you don't have the internal game right, it all just falls apart. Chapter 8 talks about intention versus impulse.
And this is the core battle of modern life, really. Impulse is reactive. The phone buzzes. I look. The boss asks for something. I immediately say yes. Intention is proactive. I'm going to work on this one specific task for the next 45 minutes, regardless of what buzzes or pings. It's setting your course before the storm hits.
And to help with that, the book introduces this really interesting concept of friction, which is funny because usually in user design, the goal is to remove all the friction to make things as easy as possible.
But for self-master, you want to learn how to manipulate friction. You want to increase friction for your bad habits and decrease it for your good ones.
Give me a concrete example of that.
Okay, let's say you want to do some deep reading in the morning, but your default habit is to scroll Instagram. To add high friction for Instagram, you could put your phone in a different room. Or even simpler, log out of the app every single time you close it. If you have to type in your password every time you open it, that little 5-second delay is often enough for your prefrontal cortex to kick in and say, wait, do I really want to be doing this?
And what about low friction for the reading?
You'd put the book on your pillow the night before, or you'd open the document on your laptop so it is the very first thing you see when you open it in the morning. You're lowering the activation energy required to start the right behavior.
I've started doing this with my gym clothes. If I had to dig through a drawer to find socks in the morning, I'm just not going to the gym. But if the socks are already in my shoes right next to the bed, I go.
That is exactly it. You are designing the path of least resistance to lead exactly where you want to go.
The section on stress management was also crucial here. It said calms is a skill. And it talked about survival mode. We touched on this earlier, but let's go a little deeper. What actually happens to our decision-making when we're chronically stressed out?
When you're in a state of chronic stress, your body is just flooded with cortisol. This creates what the book calls a survival mode state. Biologically, blood flow actually shifts away from your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, and towards your amygdala and your muscles. You're basically priming yourself to fight a tiger.
So we literally become dumber when we're stressed.
We become more reactive, much less nuanced, and way more prone to binary thinking, good or bad. Fight or run, you lose the ability to see the gray areas. You lose access to your creativity. So staying calm isn't just about wellness or feeling good, it's a performance-enhancing strategy. You cannot do high-level strategic work if your brain thinks it's being hunted.
That leads to the quote that I think, for me, defines the entire book. Discipline is not strictness, it is self-respect.
It's beautiful, isn't it? We so often think of discipline as punishing ourselves. I have to grind, I must do this. But the book reframes it completely. Discipline is saying, I respect my future self enough to do this hard thing for them right now. Or, I respect my mental health enough not to fracture my own attention into a million pieces. It's an act of care.
All right, let's bring it all home with part 6, the long game. This is chapters 9 and 10, and it's all about sustainability. Because we can do all this for a week, but how do we keep it up for a lifetime?
The big pivot here is from time management to energy management. Time is a constant resource. We all get 24 hours in a day. But energy is a highly variable resource. It fluctuates based on your sleep, your food, your stress levels, and how you choose to work.
So the goal isn't to squeeze more hours out of the day. It's to get more value out of the hours you have by showing up with better energy.
Exactly. And this connects directly to burnout. The book describes burnout as being quiet. It's not some big explosion. It's a subtle fatigue. It's the slow, creeping loss of your resilience.
And the cure they suggest is consistency over intensity. The whole tortoise and the hare story.
Right. Intensity pulling an all-nighter, working 14 hours straight, it breaks things. It creates this huge energy debt that you have to pay back with recovery time. But consistency doing, say, 4 hours of focused, deep work every single day, that compounds over time. It carries you forward without breaking you. The person who is consistent will always outperform the person who is intense but erratic.
Finally, Chapter 10 challenges us to redefine productivity for ourselves. It calls for depth over chaos, and it suggests designing what it calls a bespoke suit work style.
I love that metaphor. A bespoke suit is fitted perfectly to your specific measurements. A bespoke work style should be fitted to your unique cognition. We have to start trying to copy Elon Musk's schedule or some YouTuber's crazy morning routine.
If you need total silence to think, build silence into your day. If you thrive on the buzz of a coffee shop, find a coffee shop.
Exactly. Know yourself, and this is the hard part, have the courage to excise, to cut things out. You have to cut the superfluous urgency. You have to cut the guilt of not being everywhere for everyone all at once.
The book wraps up by calling mastering focus the one true future-proof skill. Why is that?
Well, think about AI. Think about where technology is going. What are computers really good at? They are great at multitasking. They're amazing at scanning millions of data points instantly. They are masters of low-load work. If your primary skill set is I can answer emails really fast, you are competing directly with a machine that will always be faster than you.
But the machine can't do the deep work.
Not yet, and maybe not ever in the same way we can. The ability to hold a complex, nuanced thought in your mind for 4 uninterrupted hours, to synthesize disparate ideas into a brand new strategy, to apply wisdom in context, that is the human edge. That is what will always remain valuable. If you can focus when everyone else around you is distracted, you have a superpower.
That is a really powerful place to land. So let's just summarize this whole journey. We started with the badge of honor, the big lie that busyness equals importance, and we looked at the biology, the spotlight, the switching cost, the metabolic tax of it all.
Then we explored the cultural trap, the pressure of the quick question. And then we found the middle ground, strategic multitasking, the art of pairing high-load with low-load tasks.
We built a tactical framework, knowing your energy patterns, using physical tools like Kanban boards, manipulating friction to help ourselves. And finally, we landed on the philosophy. Discipline is an act of self-respect, consistency over intensity.
It really is a total overhaul of your entire operating system.
So here's my final provocation to everyone listening. And I really want you to sit with this for a minute. I want you to look at your to-do list, not the easy stuff, not the emails you can fire off. I want you to identify the one deep task you've been avoiding, the one that scares you just a little bit, the one that requires you to clear off the entire workbench and hold that fragile vase with both hands.
And ask yourself, what would happen if I gave that one task my full, unadulterated spotlight for just 1 hour tomorrow morning?
Stop trying to be a floodlight. Embrace being a spotlight and start living beyond multitasking. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
And that's a wrap for today's chat. Big thanks to my friends for keeping the conversation flowing, and to you for hanging out with us. If you like this talk, don't forget to share it and hit follow so you won't miss the next one. Take care, stay inspired, and we'll catch up soon.